The Garage Inventor. Zach Hawkins was no stranger to things going boom in the night. His wife Linda had grown accustomed to being jolted awake at odd hours by the sounds of shattering glass, small explosions, or the occasional yelp of pain emanating from the garage. It was the price she paid for being married to a self-proclaimed gentleman mad scientist. Zach's latest misadventure stemmed, as they often did, from his day job as an engineer at Warp Drives, Incorporated. The company specialized in experimental propulsion systems, touting lofty but nebulous promises of disrupting the aerospace industry and revolutionizing transportation. In practice, this mostly involved Zach fiddling with unstable prototypes that had an alarming propensity to violently disassemble themselves at inopportune moments. It all came to a head one fateful Thursday when the CEO, a fast-talking Silicon Valley type who was all about failing fast and breaking things, decided that what the company really needed was a change in direction. Specifically, a change that involved less Zach and more synergistic innovation. "It's not you, it's us," the CEO had said, with all the sincerity of a politician kissing babies. "We just feel that your skills would be better suited to other opportunities outside of this company, effective immediately." And so Zach found himself unceremoniously escorted out of the building, a cardboard box of his meager desk possessions in hand, his employee badge unceremoniously deactivated. He sat in his beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot, staring at the gleaming glass and steel monolith that housed Warp Drives Inc., and felt a curious sense of relief. He turned the key in the ignition, the Civic's engine sputtering to life with a sound like a congested lawnmower. "Screw it," Zach muttered to himself. "I never liked that fail fast mantra anyway. I prefer to fail slowly with style." He pulled out of the parking lot and pointed his car towards home, towards his garage, towards the place where he could tinker and invent and create without the constant pressure to disrupt, or revolutionize, or whatever other buzzword the tech bros were throwing around these days. Zach Hawkins, unemployed aerospace engineer, cracked a smile as he merged onto the highway. The world, he decided, had no idea what it was in for. The next few weeks passed in a blur of soldering irons, circuit boards, and 3D printed components. Free from the shackles of his day job, Zach threw himself into his garage projects with a fervor bordering on obsession. Linda watched with a mix of bemusement and concern as her husband disappeared into his workshop for days at a time, emerging only for quick bites of food and the occasional shower. She'd find him passed out on the ratty old couch next to his workbench, bits of metal shavings and wire clippings clinging to his hair. It was during one of these marathon tinkering sessions that Zach made the discovery that would change everything. He was elbow-deep in a pile of scrap electronics, hunting for a specific type of capacitor, when his fingers brushed against something decidedly strange. The object was small, no bigger than a deck of cards, its surface an oily black that seemed to absorb light. It was featureless but for a series of precise grooves etched along its sides in a pattern that was simultaneously alien and remarkably familiar. Zach felt an instant jolt of electricity course through his body as he touched the object. It was as if all his hair was standing on end, every nerve alight with an energy he couldn't quite describe. The air around him suddenly felt thick, the smell of ozone hanging heavy as a strange keening hum filled the garage. He pulled his hand back, fingers tingling, heart racing. The object sat innocuously amid the piles of scrap, but Zach couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring at something truly extraordinary. "No way," he breathed, reaching out tentatively to pick the object up. It was cool to the touch, surprisingly heavy for its size, and utterly unlike anything Zach had ever seen before. A slow, manic grin spread across his face as he turned the alien device over in his hands. "Oh yes," he chuckled. "This is going to be fun." The alien device. Zach lost track of time as he studied the strange object. Hours blended into days as he ran test after test, probing the device's secrets with every tool and instrument at his disposal. It confounded him at every turn. Its composition defied analysis, its structure impervious to scanning. No voltmeter could penetrate its surface, no oscilloscope untangle its inner workings. Every X-ray and ultrasound came back garbled, as if the very act of observation was being thwarted. But Zack was nothing if not persistent. He built new instruments, cobbled together from spare parts, and sheer determination, each one tailored to unravel a specific aspect of the alien puzzle box. There was the quantum flux discriminator, jury-rigged from an old CRT television, and a set of superconducting magnets. A hyperspectral resonance imager, a dizzying array of lenses and mirrors cannibalized from a dozen different telescopes and microscopes. And the piece de resistance, the zero-point energy scanner, a hulking monstrosity of coils and capacitors that drew so much power it made the lights in the entire neighborhood flicker. With each new device, each new angle of attack, Zack peeled back another layer of the object's mystery. He discovered strange energy fields pulsing within its core, exotic particles, dancing to a quantum rhythm only they could hear. He mapped fluctuations in local space-time that seemed to originate from within the device itself, as if it were a tiny, self-contained warp in the fabric of reality. But for all his probing and prodding, the object remained stubbornly opaque in its function. It was clearly more than just a chunk of oddly structured matter. There was a purpose to its design, a goal to its construction. But what that purpose might be remained maddeningly out of reach. Until, in a moment of sleep-deprived inspiration, Zack tried something utterly, brilliantly mad. He connected the alien device to his prototype laser cannon. The laser cannon was a pet project, something Zack had been tinkering with in his spare time. It used an innovative cascade of amplifiers and beam shapers to produce a coherent light beam of unparalleled power and focus. On its own, it was an impressive feat of engineering. But paired with the alien device, the instant Zack completed the connection, he felt something shift in the air. The device began to hum, not with the eerie, discordant tones it had emitted before, but with a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to shake the very foundations of the garage. The laser cannon's power readout spiked, its capacitors screaming with an influx of energy that went beyond anything Zack had ever seen. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits, and the smell of ozone mixed with the acrid tang of burning insulation. But through it all, Zack only had eyes for the alien device. It had begun to glow, its inky black surface now shot through with pulsing veins of brilliant white light. The grooves etched upon its sides were moving, shifting, realigning into a new pattern that made Zack's eyes water just to look at it. With a sound like a thunderclap and a blinding flash that left spots dancing in Zack's vision, the device and the laser cannon merged. The result was something that defied description. A sleek, angular construct that seemed to drink in the light around it, promising untold power to whoever dared grasp it. Zack stared at his creation, equal parts elated and terrified. He had no idea what he'd just brought into the world. But he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that the universe would never be the same. The quantum blast. The abandoned quarry on the outskirts of town had long been Zack's go-to spot for testing his more explosive inventions. The sheer rock walls made for a good backstop, and there was minimal risk of any stray projectiles causing unintended damage. But as he set up his newly minted laser cannon on a tripod overlooking the quarry floor, Zack couldn't shake the feeling that this test would be different. The device hummed with barely contained energy, its alien component pulsing with that eerie inner light. Just being near it made Zack's skin tingle, his hair standing on end as if he were standing in a thunderstorm just before a lightning strike. He triple-checked his setup, making sure the cannon was securely anchored and pointed at a particularly thick section of quarry wall. Then, with a deep breath and a silent prayer to the gods of mad science, he flipped the switch. There was a moment of breathless anticipation, a stillness that seemed to extend to the very air itself. And then the world went sideways. The cannon roared to life with a sound that was more felt than heard, a bone-shaking vibration that rattled Zack's teeth in his skull. The brilliant lance of light erupted from the cannon's barrel, a beam of such intense energy that it seemed to warp the very space around it. The laser struck the quarry wall with a force that defied comprehension. Rock vaporized instantly, gravel and dust flying in all directions as a shockwave of superheated air rolled out from the point of impact. A deep, booming crack echoed through the quarry as the entire cliff face shuddered, massive fissures racing up its height. But it was what happened next that truly defied belief. As Zack watched, his jaw hanging slack, the laser seemed to twist. It corkscrewed in on itself, the beam warping and distorting into a spiral that drilled into the very fabric of reality. Space-time warped around the beam, the air shimmering like a heat haze gone mad. Colors that had no name in any human language flickered in and out of existence, and shapes that defied Euclidean geometry danced at the edges of Zack's vision. The cliff face, already cracked and crumbling, began to collapse in on itself. But it wasn't a normal collapse. The rocks seemed to melt and flow, folding in impossible angles as they were sucked towards the vortex of twisted light at the beam's end. And then, with a final ear-splitting crack, the laser punched through. Not just through the rock, but through the very fabric of space-time itself. For a brief, mind-bending instant, Zack caught a glimpse of something on the other side. A vast, alien expanse, filled with colors and shapes that his brain refused to process. It was beautiful and terrifying, and utterly incomprehensible. Then the beam cut off, the cannon falling silent as abruptly as it had begun. The vortex snapped shut, reality reasserting itself with an almost audible snap, and all that was left was a gaping, perfectly smooth tunnel bored straight through the heart of the cliff, its edges glassy and warped. Zack stared at the impossible hole, his mind racing to catch up with what he had just witnessed. He looked down at the cannon, now silent and still, and felt a thrill of equal parts elation and terror race down his spine. "Well," he said to no one in particular, his voice shaky. "That was something." He had no idea how accurate that statement would prove to be. Alien panic. Light years away, in a corner of the galaxy unknown to human astronomers, a civilization watched the stars with wary eyes. The Zoraxians were an ancient race, their technology so advanced it would make human science look like the fumbling of cave-dwellers. For millennia, they had monitored the cosmos, cataloging every flicker of life and intelligence they found. And in all that time, they had never once been surprised. Until now. It started as an anomaly, a strange ripple in the fabric of space-time, emanating from an unremarkable yellow star on the fringes of their star maps. The ripple was small at first, barely a blip on their sensors. But it grew, spreading outwards like a stone dropped in a still pond, warping the very structure of reality in its wake. The Zoraxians watched with growing alarm as the ripple reached their detection arrays, their instruments straining to make sense of the impossible data they were receiving. It was like nothing they'd ever seen, a fundamental disturbance in the basic laws of physics. They traced the ripple back to its source, focusing their considerable technological might on the tiny blue-green planet orbiting that distant sun. What they saw there shook them to their core. The planet was Earth, and the Zoraxians had long ago dismissed it as a backwater, its dominant species barely out of their technological infancy. Humanity's pitiful attempts at spaceflight and computing were quaint, like watching a child stack blocks in imitation of a skyscraper. But what the Zoraxians saw now put the lie to all their assumptions. There, on the planet's surface, in a structure so primitive it barely registered on their scans, was the source of the disturbance. A device, cobbled together from scavenged parts and scrap, that had punched a hole through the very fabric of the universe. It was inconceivable. It was impossible. It was terrifying. The Zoraxian High Council convened in a flurry of activity, their normal stately decorum abandoned in the face of this unprecedented crisis. They argued and debated, voices rising in panic and disbelief. How could this happen? One counselor demanded, his usually purple skin flushed a deep violet. How could a species so primitive create such a thing? It must be a mistake. Another insisted, her tendrils twitching with agitation. A malfunction in our sensors. Surely no mere human could wield such power. But the evidence was irrefutable. The ripple continued to spread, the disturbance growing with every passing moment. And at its center, shining like a beacon, was the unmistakable signature of human technology. "We must act," the High Counselor said, her voice cutting through the clamor. "This cannot be allowed to continue. The humans have stumbled upon a power they cannot possibly understand, let alone control. If left unchecked, they could tear apart the very foundations of reality." There was a heavy silence as the weight of her words sunk in. Then, with a grim determination, the council began to plan. They would send a delegation to this Earth, to this human who had dared to play with forces beyond his ken. They would assess the situation, and then they would do whatever was necessary to contain the threat. For the sake of the galaxy, for the sake of all that was, the humans could not be allowed to keep this power, no matter the cost. Visit to Earth. Zack was in his garage, tinkering with the alien-enhanced laser cannon for the umpteenth time, when he heard it. A whirring, pulsing sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He looked up from his work, brow furrowed in confusion. At first he thought it might be another of his inventions acting up. God knew his garage was full of devices that made all kinds of weird noises. But this was different. It was too coherent, too purposeful, almost like. Zack's eyes widened as realization hit. "No way," he breathed. "It can't be." But it was. With a flash of blinding light and a rush of displaced air, a craft appeared in the middle of Zack's garage. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, all sleek curves and shimmering silver, hovering a few inches off the cluttered floor. For a long, stunned moment, Zack could only stare. Then, with a hiss of releasing pressure, a door opened in the craft's side. A ramp extended, and down it walked three figures that were decidedly not human. They were tall and slender, with skin that shimmered in shades of purple and blue. Their eyes were large and almond-shaped, pupilless and glowing with an inner light. They moved with a fluid grace that made Zack feel suddenly clumsy and awkward in comparison. The leader, distinguishable by the intricate patterns etched into its shimmering skin, stepped forward. It regarded Zack with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through him, seeing not just his physical form, but the very essence of his being. "Zachary Hawkins," it said, its voice musical and resonant, "we have come to speak with you about your invention." Zack gaped, his mind struggling to process the fact that there were honest-to-God aliens standing in his garage. "How do you know my name?" he managed. The alien made a gesture that might have been a shrug. "We have been watching your world for some time. Your recent activities have drawn our attention." Its gaze shifted to the laser cannon, and Zack thought he detected a flicker of something like fear in those glowing eyes. "That device," the alien continued, "is dangerous. More dangerous than you can possibly imagine. You have stumbled upon a power that could unravel the very fabric of the universe. We are here to ensure that does not happen." Zack bristled at the implication. "Now hold on just a minute," he said, taking a step forward. "I invented this. I built it with my own two hands. You can't just come in here and tell me what I can and can't do with my own creation." The alien's expression remained impassive. "You do not understand the forces you are playing with. The consequences of your actions could be catastrophic, not just for your world, but for the entire galaxy." Zack opened his mouth to argue, but something in the alien's tone gave him pause. There was a gravity there, a weight of knowledge and experience that made his own achievements feel suddenly small and insignificant. He looked at the cannon, at the alien device fused to its core. He thought about the power he felt coursing through it, the way it had warped reality itself. Maybe, just maybe, these aliens had a point. "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's say I believe you. What exactly do you propose we do about it?" The alien gestured towards the craft. "Come with us. We have much to discuss, and not much time. The fate of worlds hangs in the balance." Zack hesitated, his gaze flicking between the aliens and his invention. He poured his heart and soul into that device, had staked his entire identity on it. Could he really just hand it over? Let someone else dictate its fate? But in the end, faced with the sheer scope of what he created, he knew he had no choice. With a heavy sigh, he nodded. "Lead the way." As he walked up the ramp into the alien craft, leaving his garage and his life behind, Zack couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a much larger story, one where he was no longer the sole protagonist. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and humbling all at once. The ramp sealed shut behind him with a hiss, the craft's interior enveloping him in a soft, silvery glow. As it lifted off, phasing through the roof of his garage like a ghost, Zack caught one last glimpse of his laser cannon. It sat there amid the clutter and debris of his workshop, looking simultaneously out of place and perfectly at home. A small smile tugged at his lips. Whatever happened next, whatever the aliens had in store for him, one thing was certain. Zack Hawkins, backyard tinkerer and accidental revolutionary, had just changed the course of history, and nothing would ever be the same again. Interstellar implications. The news spread like wildfire, rippling out from Earth to every corner of the inhabited galaxy. The humans, those backwater primitives, had done the impossible. They had created a device that could punch holes in the fabric of space-time itself. In the grand halls of the Galactic Council, representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered in a flurry of activity. Some came in sleek ships that sliced through the void like silver fish, others via shimmering portals that folded space like origami. All were united in their purpose, to decide the fate of humanity. "This cannot be allowed to stand," the Zoraxian ambassador declared, his voice booming through the cavernous chamber. "The humans have proven themselves to be a danger to the very fabric of reality. They must be stopped." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. Many had long viewed humanity as a nuisance, a species too young and reckless to be trusted with the keys to the cosmos. This latest incident only confirmed their worst fears. But there were dissenting voices as well. "The humans may be primitive," the Altraxian delegate said, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into a dazzling display. "But they are also innovative, ingenious even. Look at what they have achieved with nothing but scavenged parts and sheer determination. Ingenuity is no substitute for wisdom," the Zoraxian countered, "and the humans have shown precious little of that." The debate raged on, voices rising and falling like the tides. But through it all, one question remained unspoken, hanging in the air like a sword of Damocles. What of the human who had started it all? What of Zack Hawkins? Far from the grand councils and political machinations, Zack found himself at the center of a very different kind of attention. To the teeming billions of Earth, he was a hero, a visionary who had single-handedly propelled humanity into a new age of interstellar relevance. His face was plastered across every newsfeed and holoscreen, his name on everyone's lips. The man who had built a doomsday device in his garage, the tinkerer who had struck fear into the hearts of even the most advanced alien civilizations. It was a lot to take in for someone who, just weeks before, had been worried about making rent and keeping his power tools from overheating. Zack found himself swept up in a whirlwind of interviews, public appearances, and scientific inquiries, all clamoring to know the secret behind his world-shattering invention. But through it all, through the chaos and the acclaim, and the weight of sudden, dizzying celebrity, Zack held on to one unshakable truth. He had started this journey not for fame or glory, but for the sheer love of invention, for the thrill of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And as he stood on stage, accepting yet another accolade from yet another awestruck audience, he knew that would never change. No matter what the aliens decided, no matter what the future held, Zack Hawkins would always be the garage tinkerer at heart. He looked out over the sea of faces, human and alien alike, all hanging on his every word. And he smiled. "You know," he said, "when I started this, all I wanted was to build something cool, something that would make people stop and say, wow, I never imagined it would lead to all this." He gestured encompassingly at the auditorium, at the world beyond. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can never predict where your inventions will take you. You start with an idea, a spark, and you nurture it. You pour your heart and soul into it. And sometimes, just sometimes, it grows into something bigger than you ever dreamed." He paused, his gaze scanning the crowd. "That's the power of human ingenuity. That's the power of the tinkerer's spirit. And no matter what the galaxy throws at us, no matter what challenges we face, that's something that will never change." The applause was deafening, a roar of sound that shook the very foundations of the auditorium. And as Zack basked in the adulation, he knew that whatever else happened, he had already achieved his greatest ambition. He had changed the world, and the universe would never be the same. The end.